Hi there and welcome to the channel and to this my March wrap in which I reflect on both the quantity and the quality of the books I read this month. Now in terms of numbers, it's difficult to count because there are quite a few short stories in there today, but I think I've finished 6 books. And with regards to quality, it was a very good month, as you will see. So without further ado, let's begin, and we start with, well, the very start of the Western literary tradition. It is the Odyssey. Well, I suppose the Iliad would come first actually, but having read this Robert Fitzgerald translation, I would actually recommend that if you're going to choose between reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, you read the Odyssey first. Now, I know this sounds rather counterintuitive, but bear with me. There are a few things in the Odyssey's favour. There are not that many principal characters. The gods have a rather limited involvement. There's just a few to remember. I think it's Zeus, Athena and Poseidon. And another thing that is very useful is there's lots of backstory in here that acquaints you with the events of the Iliad. So rather paradoxically, this book, the sequel, one might say, to the Iliad, is actually a good introduction to it. Okay, so I am going to read the Iliad after. So I've got some translations here and I'm trying to choose between them. So first off, we have this Penguin Classics, and the translator here is E.V. Ryu. Yes, and then we have another Penguin Classics, and this translator is Martin Hammond. And then finally, yes, Fitzgerald again. So if you've got any thoughts on English translations of the Iliad, the one you favour, the one you think is particularly great, why not leave a comment below and direct me to it. Okay, so staying with the great books, I was also planning this month to read Tales from the 1001 Nights. So this one has a translation here by N.J. Dawood, and I also have this Signet classic Arabian Nights, and this is the Richard Burton translation. However, having read around about the quality of these translations and how faithful they are in terms of selection to the original tales, I've settled on Haddawy's modern translation, and he has a great introduction where he pinpoints the weaknesses of these. And the Dawood one I didn't realise, but barely any of the stories in here are actually in the original Arabian Nights. They were later added, such as Aladdin and Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. So there you go. I'm not going to read these. I'm going to read the Haddawy 1001 Nights. Then travel writing, and this is excellent. Well, by a travel writer, not actually travel writing. It's biography by Norman Lewis, one of the 20th century's greatest travel writers. And this is about his very eccentric early life in Wales, with some truly bizarre family relations. One liked to dress as a harlequin or a pirate each day. She would change. Another had some of her face missing. She was epileptic and she'd fallen into a fire during a seizure and been terribly burned, and so she was rarely seen out of her room. And then the other sister is fairly normal actually, but the patriarch in the house is utterly bizarre. Then he returns to his family, I think it's in Essex, and his mother and father get into spiritualism. So you can imagine how many strange people are coming round to their house. It's just written in a beautiful deadpan style. So Norman Lewis, I strongly recommend his writing. I've got his travel omnibus here by Picador as well, which has his travels around Indochina and Burma. And I've read some of this too. It's just brilliantly done. The first one, the last one is very good. A Goddess in the Stones. Now we go on to my French literature obsession. Apologies for this. I've just done the video on great short novels, and then I read this. Benjamin Constance Adolphe, and this is from 1816, and this would definitely have been in the great short novels list. This was superb. It's about a tragic love affair, and I have a whole cluster of works that all centre upon tragic love affairs. So I have Maupassant's Alien Hearts, which is quite good, Victoria by Knut Hamsun, First Love by Turgenev, but I would have to say this is probably the purest distillation of the tragic love affair, and it's just so great about how the man is trying to disentangle himself from this affair with an older woman, and she absolutely loves him and doesn't want to let him go. And they reach this point where neither can be honest with the other, and it just keeps adding to their misery. And the conclusion is rather good too. It does finish quite similarly to Knut Hamsun's Victoria. I think they're all taking their inspiration from these earlier examples. It seems, reading around about this, that people in France, French readers, have themselves rather lost touch with this work, and there are people out there trying to bring it back to public attention. But I am going to do that for an English-speaking audience by recommending Benjamin Constant's Adolphe, or Adolphe. That was excellent. More French writing, and we're into the short stories now. So it's Colette. I've often seen her name and seen many of these books in used bookstores when I was in the UK, but I hadn't read any of them. I knew that she was involved with the theatre, but I wasn't ready for just how good these are. Absolutely wonderful. And so I read 3 in here. I'll just find the titles and give you a brief recap. Where is it? Green Sealing Wax. Oh yes, this was excellent. Starts off by detailing her obsession with stationery supplies, one that I share myself. Actually, I'm sure many of us do, bookish types. And then it goes off at a really unexpected tangent, and you get, in effect, another quite suspenseful short story, 2 for the price of 1 there. And then there are 2 about love, one about a doctor. What would this one be? Oh, I can't remember offhand, but the one about the doctor was very good. It was all about different kinds of amorous goings on in the countryside, some of them moral, some of them distinctly immoral. And Colette just gives you the feeling of someone who really knows life from the inside and the outside, and she's terribly well informed about everyone's secrets. That was part of the pleasure of reading this. And then the third one was about a very diffident young man whose childhood sweetheart is basically waiting for him to propose to her, and he just can't summon up the courage, and finally he manages to do it by default, as it were. And that one showed off Colette's comic writing skills. So Colette, strongly recommended also. I look forward to reading more of that. The Rainy Moon and other stories. Then novels that I read actually in French. So I found a whole bunch of these really horrible editions actually of Jules Verne sci-fi stories. This one is a kind of gothic sci-fi story, I guess, and it's called the Château de Carpathes, the castle in the Carpathians. And sometimes this is referenced as perhaps having influenced Bram Stoker's Dracula, because it's set in Transylvania and it was published in 1892. But actually, more interestingly, all of the elements are present in here of Gaston Leroux's Phantom of the Opera, which, unsurprisingly, Leroux never acknowledged. But you have a great sequence set in Italy where 2 noblemen from Romania fall in love with an opera singer, and their obsession drives her to retire. So the one has a kind of innocent obsession, and the other one has a malicious, weird obsession. And so the opera singer agrees to elope with the good guy, but at the time of her final performance, when she steps forward right at the end, suddenly she dies on stage. So you can see the parallels with the Phantom. Also, there is an engineering genius in this story. In the Phantom is the engineering genius, right? And he's not actually a nobleman, but it's pretty obvious where Leroux drew inspiration from. That said, this is much less successful than the Phantom of the Opera, but technology plays a very interesting role in the way this story develops. In fact, there wouldn't even be a story, as the catalyzing moment is a shepherd getting a spyglass and being able to detect a plume of smoke coming from the seemingly abandoned castle, which then propels events forward because he's able to share the spyglass with other members of the village, and they can confirm objectively that something is going on. So not that great, but great for learning, and packed with information. The second one, Les 500 Millions de Bégum. This one is very interesting. It kind of picks up on the legacy of the Franco-Prussian War, 1870, where France was dealt a devastating blow and had to cede part of its territory, Alsace-Lorraine, to the Germans. And so you have someone from the Alsace in this story who works as a spy to basically undermine the Germans. And the idea is quite neat. There is an inheritance that hasn't been claimed, and a French doctor is identified as the last surviving heir. He doesn't know this, and so he's entitled to this huge fortune, and then he finds out he'll have to split it with a German who is also part of his family line and didn't know that fact either. So what happens is the French guy goes and builds a model city in Oregon, and the German guy follows suit and buys and builds a German ideal city, the City of Steel, next to Franceville. And of course, the German being a German, he's based on Bismarck. He develops all of the military capacity in this city, and then he hatches plans for world domination. And our spy from the Alsace, Marcel, has to go in and find out the secrets and then report to Franceville. And then the final sequence is a very gripping adventure story full of climbing walls, fisticuffs, shootouts, and then the discovery of a terrible secret. So the climax was really well done. This was just full of humour and imagination. It was much better than The Castle in the Carpathians. You can get these in English, but I just read them in French for practice. I'm trying to saturate my French learning so that basically I'll be able to pick up any book and there won't be really any words on a page that I don't know. So to reach the saturation point, it's going to take me a while, but I am getting there. Then I've already talked about this on my The Joys of Reading French Literature video. It's Patrick Modiano. My opinion on this hasn't changed. Basically, you can read this with a very low level of French, and yet it was awarded the Nobel Prize. It really does show that standards are slipping, not just in the Anglosphere, but all over the world or in the centres of the major languages. So this was okay, but fairly forgettable. Then I read some more of my Cruel and Fantastic Stories by Guy de Maupassant, and this time I'll put the English translation of the best of them in the description below, and it was The Tomb, where in a very Poe-like fashion, a man has his lover die and he can't bear never to see her face again. So he digs her up to have one last look and is caught in the act. And then we switch to a courtroom scene where he offers this impassioned defense of the mad acts that love has propelled him to. So you can guess the reaction of all the jurors. At the start, they're all basically in the court chanting for him to be put to death, but there's a different outcome there. Very nice story. And what do we have next? Oh, switching languages for a second, although I think we'll go back to French after this. It's La Habitación de Nona by a Spanish writer, Cristina Fernandez Cubas. And in here I read, what was it called? Something about old people. Hablar con viejas. Okay, so talking with old ladies. And there's only one old lady in this story. Starts off feeling like it's in one particular genre. It's a young woman who seems to have mismanaged her financial affairs, and she's basically trying to get a loan from an old flame. So she heads out to a restaurant to meet him. He doesn't show up, he sends a message. And then on the way home, she meets a wonderful old lady, and then there is a major twist. It reminded me of one of those Roald Dahl tales of the unexpected, like The Landlady, something like that. I expected something a little more literary from this, but it was pretty ghastly. And what would I say? For about 2 days afterwards, my mind kept going back to this story and just kind of shuddering. Yeah, so it did work on that kind of visceral level. You can find this one translated into English. Then Boileau-Narcejac. So this was the first novel I finished in French. I did talk about it, The Shadow and the Prey, which was really not very good. But this second one, Celle qui n'était elle, it translated into English as The Woman Who Wasn't There, is really excellent. There's a fantastic twist. A husband and his mistress murder his wife for the insurance money and to go and start a new life together in the south of France. But after dumping the body at night, the next day, when he stages the discovery of the body in the company of one of his neighbours, something very surprising has happened. And I won't say any more than that, but it was turned into a film, this one. So in 1955, you have the Diabolique a French adaptation, and then there was Diabolique by Sharon Stone, or starring Sharon Stone, from 1996. So if you're interested in this story, you can actually just watch a Western or a French movie adaptation of it. And then I'll show you one of the critical books I'm using to support my understanding, my developing understanding of French literature, and that is this one by, I can't see if it's Oxford UP, and it is a short history of French literature. Far too expensive to actually buy. This one's from the University Library. It costs you about $100 at least, but it's pretty good. It's not really linear in its approach. You get an overview of a particular period, and I think the periodization is too long. For example, 1789 runs until when? Have a guess. 1789 to 2000. I don't see how you can really bind those periods together for their treatment. So I'm just focusing on the period I'm interested in, which is just after the Revolution. And you get these subheadings, like Romanticism in verse, and it begins walking you through what developments were going on from 1789. And then you get another one. There was one about Napoleon, which had quite a few useful factoids there for me to grasp onto. So Napoleon Bonaparte seized power on the 18th Brumaire, year 7. You know, they had this new calendar after the Revolution. That was the 9th of November, 1799. Okay, so if you want a more linear introduction, then I recommend the very short introduction to French literature. And then I think we have just one more, and this is Spanish again, Sergio Ramírez. And I picked this up from the library because I really loved the jungle setting on the cover, and he is from Nicaragua, and he was actually a part of the Sandinista government in the 1980s and 90s, I believe. But like many of the people involved in the Sandinistas, he is a poet and a writer. And in here, I read a very good story today, and it was La Banda del Presidente, and it did recall for me, Václav Havel's The Politics of the Powerless. It did remind me of that in some respects. It's about a society where, first of all, the newspapers lose interest in covering politics, and then the political parties lose all of their members and basically dissolve, and then no one pays taxes anymore because the public simply aren't interested, and the state begins to wither away. And finally, there's a president, but no one really knows who they are, and they try to make themselves noticed, and they go to a baseball game, and people are just indifferent to them. A few people remember that he had an acting career in the past, and at the end, he tries to whip up lots of public interest with a dramatic announcement, and he comes on TV and makes this declaration, and people just kind of nod their heads and just carry on. So this was quite a good kind of parable or fable in here. It's very compact and well imagined, so I'm looking forward to reading some more about this. He's still alive, actually, so he may still be producing work. I'm not sure what's available in English, but Sergio Ramírez, actually looking, there are the 3 parts of his Managua trilogy. They have been translated into English, so some of you out there may have already read his work. Now, before I go, the last thing that remains is to choose the book of the month. And the problem with this is, as in months where I read Shakespeare, for example, then it's very difficult to choose something that wasn't Shakespeare. And obviously, in a month where I've read the Odyssey, and I'm going to make another Great Books video to follow up the first on the Divine Comedy, and I will focus most likely on the Odyssey or Livy's Early History of Rome. But how can I say any of these other works were better than the Odyssey? So my book of the month for March 2025 is Robert Fitzgerald's translation of the Odyssey, which I greatly enjoyed. The only thing I think I would pick out here is I often find that translators of these pagan times use the word carouse, because I guess it's very has a beautiful sound, and it does evoke kind of revelry and partying. But actually that's a Germanic word, which is of much more recent origin. So every time I see that, I think of Gar Austrinken, which is where carouse comes from. So that always strikes me as kind of anachronistic. Okay, but that is a very small nitpick in what is a very fine translation, and I truly savoured every page of this. I know we all think we know the story of the Odyssey, but it's well worth picking it up and reading it every now and again. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave some comments below for me to read, and also I'm very grateful to people who are sharing videos on the channel. I can see from the site statistics how often it happens, although I can't see who's sharing or what they're sharing. But when I do see that 5 times people have shared my videos, then I'm very happy, because I am still trying to grow the channel. It's very difficult to rely on the YouTube algorithm, so that is much appreciated. And now all that remains is for me to bid you farewell in the customary fashion. So until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.